Dean Martin truly hated him more than anyone. Try not to gasp. Part 1. The Beverly Hills Letters. December 25, 1995. Christmas morning, Beverly Hills, California. Dean Martin dies at home, age 78. Acute respiratory failure. America wakes up to the news on Christmas Day. Dean Martin is gone. The smooth crooner, the Rat Pack legend, the king of cool dead. His daughter, Deana Martin, handles the estate in the weeks following, sorting through her father's sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. Then she finds something unexpected in his private study. A locked desk drawer. She forces it open. Inside, dozens of letters, some typed, some handwritten in Dean's distinctive scroll. Letters addressed to people but never sent, never mailed, just written and stored away. The dates span decades, 1950s through 1995. Letters to Jerry Lewis, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., ex-wives, his dead son Dean Paul, and many letters about someone named Mort Viner. These weren't meant for anyone's eyes, just Dean alone at night getting thoughts out, saying things he could never say in person. The real Dean Martin behind the cool facade America loved. The cool was a prison. One letter from 1978 reads, "I've been performing cool for 50 years, and nobody knows the real me. Not my partners, not my friends, not even my children." 2024, 29 years after Dean's death, Deana Martin decides to release excerpts from the letters. Not everything. Some are too personal, too dark, but enough to finally show who Dean Martin really was. And the letters reveal something nobody expected. For decades, everyone assumed the person Dean Martin hated most was Jerry Lewis, the comedy partner. The legendary split, 20 years of not speaking. But the letters reveal a different truth. Dean wrote about Jerry with sadness, not hatred, with regret, not rage. The person Dean truly hated, the one whose name appears again and again with increasing venom, Mort Viner. Most people today have never heard of Mort Viner. Talent manager, producer, died in 2013, largely forgotten. But for over 40 years, Mort Viner was Dean Martin's personal manager, the man who controlled every aspect of Dean's career, who created the Dean Martin King of Cool brand. And according to Dean's private letters, the man who owned him, "I should have strangled Mort with my bare hands," Dean wrote in 1987. "He owned me for 40 years, made me perform everything, and I let him, and I hate him for it." Part 2. The King of Cool. Dean Martin wasn't born cool. He was born Dino Paul Crochet, June 7, 1917, Steubenville, Ohio, a rough steel town. Son of an Italian immigrant barber who barely spoke English. Poor family. Nothing cool about it. Young Dino dropped out of high school in 10th grade. Dealt blackjack in illegal gambling houses, boxed as a kid crochet, and sang in small clubs for tips. Not smooth, not sophisticated, just a poor Italian kid trying to survive. In the 1940s, Dino moved to New York, trying to make it as a singer. Changed his name to Dean Martin. Worked on his accent, smoothing out the Italian, the rough edges. Worked on a persona, casual, relaxed, like nothing bothered him. It wasn't natural. It was constructed carefully, deliberately. The letters reveal this clearly. Dean's cool was manufactured, rehearsed, performed in a letter from 1960. Dean wrote, "People think I'm naturally cool. They're wrong. I rehearse everything. Practice the slouch. Time to laugh. Cool work. Hard, exhausting work." By the 1950s and 60s, Dean Martin had perfected the image. The smooth singer, the Rat Pack member, the Vegas headliner, the TV variety show star. Image, effortless, casual, cool, reality, calculated, rehearsed. Mostly sober during performances, worked incredibly hard at making it all look easy and lonely, profoundly lonely. In a letter from 1975, Dean wrote, "I'm the loneliest man in Hollywood, surrounded by people constantly. And nobody knows me because I show them Dean Martin, the character, the performance. But Dino Crocetti was real, and I buried Dino 50 years ago. And now I don't remember how to be real anymore." For people show Dean different aspects of that loneliness. Jerry Lewis showed him that partnerships end when performing replaces authenticity. Frank Sinatra showed him that real cool is authentic, not manufactured. Sammy Davis Jr. showed him that he wasn't as loyal as he pretended. Dean Paul Martin, his son, showed him what actually mattered, and was taken away before Dean could drop the performance. But one person controlled the performance, profited from it, owned it, and Dean spent 30 years hating him for it. Part 3. Jerry Lewis. The partnership that wasn't Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. Martin and Lewis. For 10 years, from 1946 to 1956, they were the biggest comedy act in America. Dean was the straight man. Jerry was a comedian. Together, unstoppable. Radio, television, 16 movies. Las Vegas sold out crowds everywhere. The image was perfect partnership. Best friends, brothers, but the letters tell a different story. For years, everyone assumed Jerry Lewis ended the partnership. Jerry was the bigger star by 1956. More attention, more press. But according to Dean's letters, that's not what happened. Dean ended it. In a letter from 1958, Dean wrote, "Everyone thinks Jerry left me. Wrong, I left Jerry. I couldn't take it anymore being the straight man, the sidekick. 10 years where Jerry got all the attention, all the credit. I was 40 years old, a supporting player to a guy 10 years younger. So I walked away." The split devastated Jerry. He'd loved Dean, considered him a brother. After the breakup, Jerry said publicly, "Dean never cared. Not about me, not about anything. He was cold, unfailing. I loved him like a brother. He treated me like a business associate." But Dean's letters reveal something more complicated. In a letter from 1970, Dean wrote, Jerry said, "I never cared about him. I did care, but I couldn't show it because showing emotion breaks the cool. And the cool was my protection. So Jerry thought I was cold, but I was cold because I was scared. Scared of being real." In 1976, Frank Sinatra orchestrated a reunion. Surprised Jerry on his telethon by bringing Dean on stage, live television. They hugged, both cried, America cried, but the letters reveal even that moment was performance. In 1977, Dean wrote, "We reunited on TV. Everyone cried. But the truth is, we're strangers now. We were strangers even when we were partners, because I never let Jerry see the real me." You can't have real friendship with a performance. Jerry Lewis died in 2017. In interviews late in life, Jerry still seemed hurt, still confused about why Dean had been so distant. And Dean's letters make it clear. It was a performance. Always the performance. The cool that protected Dean also isolated him. Jerry Lewis showed Dean Martin that partnership without authenticity is hollow. That cool is lonely. Part 4. Frank Sinatra, the real deal. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, the two biggest stars of the Rat Pack. Best friends. Partners in the legendary Las Vegas shows that defined 1960s cool. Frank was the leader. Dean was his right-hand man. The image was two cool guys having the time of their lives. But the letters revealed complications. Frank Sinatra was naturally cool. I didn't rehearse it. It was just cool. Dangerous, authentic, volatile, all real. Frank was completely authentically himself at all times. Dean Martin performed cool through careful control. In a letter from 1962, Dean wrote, "Frank is cool without trying. I try without being cool. When Frank walks into a room, he owns it naturally. When I walk into a room, I perform owning it. It's exhausting. Frank's cool is who he is. My cool is what I do." The Rat Pack shows were legendary. Frank would improvise, changing the show every night. Pure instinct. Dean couldn't do that. He rehearsed the spontaneous moments, practiced the casual remarks. His spontaneity was scripted. In 1965, Dean wrote, "Did a Rat Pack show last night. Frank was brilliant, pure instinct, changed half the show on the fly. I hit all my marks, said all my rehearsed ad-libs, and went home exhausted from pretending to be spontaneous." Frank considered Dean his best friend, trusted him, confided in him, opened up completely, but Dean couldn't reciprocate. In 1968, Dean wrote, "Frank told me everything about Mia. He was vulnerable. I listened, gave advice, but I didn't share anything real back because that would mean dropping the cool, and I can't do that. Won't do that because Frank is naturally everything I have to fake." The contrast haunted Dean. Frank Sinatra could be anything: angry, sad, joyful, violent, tender, all authentic. Dean Martin could only be cool. Dean. One note for Worshie years. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. At Dean's funeral in 1995, Frank cried openly, lost his best friend, but Dean's letters suggest Frank lost Dean Martin, the cool guy. The performance, he never really knew Dino Crochet T. Frank Sinatra, showed Dean Martin that authentic cool beats are manufactured cool every time, that being completely yourself is cooler than any performance, and Dean knew it and couldn't change it. Part 5, Sammy Davis Jr., the abandoned brother. Sammy Davis Jr. was the most talented member of the Rat Pack, could sing, dance, act, play instruments, the most gifted performer in the group. He was also the most vulnerable. A black man performing in 1950s and 1960s America, facing racism constantly. In Las Vegas, where Sammy performed 2 sold-out crowds, he couldn't stay in the hotels where he headlined, couldn't eat in the restaurants, and faced segregation daily. Frank Sinatra especially stood up for Sammy, demanded hotels integrate, and used his power to fight for his friend. And Dean was friendly, professional, but when loyalty required risk or sacrifice, Dean was absent. In 1960, during the Kennedy campaign, Sam's engagement to white actress Mae Britt created problems. The campaign asked Sammy to postpone his wedding until after the election. Sammy agreed, postponed his wedding for the campaign for his friends. Frank was outraged. Dean Martin said nothing, did nothing. In a letter from 1960, Dean wrote, "Sammy postponed his wedding for us, and I said nothing because defending Sammy publicly would damage my image, so I let Sammy sacrifice alone, and I'm a coward for it." The pattern continued as the civil rights movement grew. Some venues didn't want integrated acts, wanted Dean solo. Dean took those bookings. In 1965, Dean wrote, "Took a booking in Miami, whites only club, big money." Mort said the money was too good to pass up. I agreed. Sammy heard about it, called me. I said, "Business decision," he said. "I understand." But I heard the hurt in his voice because money mattered more than loyalty. Sammy Davis Jr. was loyal to Dean Martin for 40 years. Dean gave measured performances of friendship. In 1968, Dean wrote, "Sammy would take a bullet for Frank, would probably take one for me. And I wouldn't take a bullet for anyone because taking bullets breaks the cool dot. So Sammy gives everything to friendships, and I give calculated friendliness. That's not friendship, that's exploitation." Sammy died in 1990. Dean attended the funeral, cried publicly. But in a letter after Sammy's death, Dean revealed, went to Sammy's funeral, cried, and I realized I'm performing grief. I don't know how to feel these things authentically anymore, even at my friend's funeral. I'm thinking about how the crying looks. Sammy Davis Jr. showed Dean Martin that he wasn't actually loyal. That cool detachment is just selfishness with better marketing. Part 6. Dean Paul Martin, the son. Dean Paul Martin was born November 17, 1951. Dean's son, with his second wife, Jean Beeger, named after his father, Dino. He grew up during his father's peak fame, tried entertainment, formed a pop group, Dino, Desi, and Billy. I had some success. Then I tried acting, small roles, nothing major. Then he found his real passion, flying, joined the California Air National Guard, became an F-4 Phantom pilot, finally felt like himself. But the relationship with his father was complicated. Dean Martin was a distant father, always working, always performing. In 1970, Dean Martin wrote, "Dino was almost 20 years old, and I barely know him. I've been there physically, but emotionally absent, because letting him see the real me means dropping the performance. So, he has Dean Martin as a father, not a real father, a performance of a father." Dean, Paul married, had a son named Alexander, then divorced and continued flying. March 21, 1987, a routine training flight. Dean Paul Martin, aged 35, piloting an F-4 Phantom jet through the California mountains. The weather turned bad. The plane disappeared from radar. It crashed into San Gorgonio Mountain. Both crew members were killed instantly. Dean Martin found out from television news watching TV. Suddenly, his son's face appeared on the screen. Air National Guard pilot Dean Paul Martin was killed in a crash, and something in Dean Martin broke completely and permanently. For the first time in 50 years, the cool disappeared. Dean was real, and the real Dean was destroyed. In a letter dated March 22, 1987, Dean's handwriting was barely legible, shaky. "My son is dead. Dino is dead." And I never told him. Never told him I loved him. Never let him see the real me. He was always performing. Always Dean Martin. Cool, distant. And now he's dead. And I never got to be real with him. Never got to be an actual father. And he died never knowing how much. I loved him because I couldn't drop the performance long enough to say it. And that's the worst thing in the world. Dean Martin fell apart after his son's death, stopped performing regularly, canceled shows, withdrew from public life, stayed home, drank heavily, became a recluse. In 1989, Dean wrote, "I died when Dino died. It just took my body 8 more years to catch up. Nothing matters anymore. My son is dead. And I never told him I loved him. That's all that matters now. And it's too late." Friends tried to help, but Dean was unreachable. Locked in grief, locked in regret. In 1994, Dean wrote, "I performed for 50 years. Performed cool, performed not caring. But the one time I needed to drop the performance with my son, I couldn't do it. And now he's gone. And my son died never knowing the real me. And that's unforgivable." Dean Paul Martin's death destroyed his father. Showed Dean that everything he built was worthless compared to being real with the people you love. But even that devastating loss wasn't the person Dean hated most, because Dean Paul didn't betray him. The person Dean hated most was the one who controlled the performance for 40 years, who owned Dean Martin and wouldn't let Dino Crochet breathe. Part 7. Mort Viner, the owner. Everyone expects the answer to be Jerry Lewis, the famous split, the legendary feud.